Everybody, we'd like to introduce you today with Prof Bezuidenhout.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much. So, I saw the invite, and it says water yesterday, today, tomorrow. All right. So, water's been with us, and we've been with water forever. If you look at the Bible, from a Christian perspective, the very first 10 verses speaks about water and creation. If you look at the Quran, exactly the same, that all life is made from water. Everything comes from water. That's in the Quran. Buddhism, same. Water symbolizes purity, clarity, calmness. And Buddha, in his 45 years of living, has preached that. And these four elements, earth, water, air, fire, those are crucial, critical elements. So, water has been there. And if you go to the Big Bang theory, to be exactly the same. This wonderful molecule made up of two elements, hydrogen, the smallest, and oxygen. And because of that configuration, it is a wonderful molecule with its properties. And because of that, and no matter how we look at the various theories, but this molecule is central. In there, ever since the beginning, here with us today, and there are opportunities within it. So, $500 before Christ, already in the city of Rome, there was a sewer system. That was because of the realization that this water that we have, and that where we put stuff into, particularly sanitation stuff that we put into this water, cannot be around us, and it should find a way somewhere. That stage, the somewhere was still out there. Even Pompeii had toilets, public toilets, as well as private toilets in that very ancient city. During the medieval period, there's been a deterioration of the concept of this wonderful resource, where it has been taken for granted. And you can think about a European city where there's lots of water always coming because the snow is always melting. There's sufficient quantities of water. The rivers are constantly flowing. So people didn't really care about it. And the way they operated was animals were anywhere, and they were slaughtered and they were eaten, and sanitation products were left behind in those cities. But that affected their health, and it led to outbreaks. And because of these disease outbreaks, particularly cholera, typhoid, that sort of thing, there had to come some interventions. So some technologies were then developed. that brought fresher water into cities, but also take these waste products out of the cities. And then groundwater, exactly where you guys are. Groundwater technologies were developed for getting that fresh water out of the aquifers to be available. But what also happened at the time is, what do we do with this waste products? And that's where holding ground became a facility. But that facility came back to haunt them because now the aquifers got affected. And that again led to outbreaks, typhoid, cholera, etc. So bad was it at some stage in England that the Thames were completely filled with all this garbage coming from out of the cities, particularly in this case London. So there had to be some interventions. And this picture I show specifically to show that in Paris, for example, where the old city was developed, and you get the opportunity, those of you that have been there will see that the alleys are, the buildings are very close to each other. So what happened was, at night when you have done whatever, you just pour it outside, out of that window into the alley, and there was somebody coming along and eating up a bit, and it led to infections spreading, this disease, typhoid, but also rats and all sorts of other problems. So eventually it dawned upon them, let's get this material out of the city. And the development of sewer lines, and some of those sewer lines are still there, and one can go and have a tour in those sewer lines. And we find it in many of the older cities across the world where these sewer facilities are still operational, where in some cases there are pipes taking the sewer. But the central part of it is that water is used to ferry the waste. Water is used to take the waste, to transport the waste away from the civilized regions of these cities. So if one looks at disease and disease outbreaks and interventions, it sort of overlays with interventions in terms of water. Now this is a typical case for America, but it couldn't be in Europe as well, because around about the mid 1910s, round about there, the first continuous chlorination was introduced. Prior to that, there were other processes also for treating water for drinking purposes. That has been coming on for a long time. I'm not going into that. In the late 1800s, chlorine was used, but that was in isolated scenarios. But for continuous use of chlorination, round about the mid between 1900 and 1920. And that has all resulted in a decrease in the death rate, besides the other interventions as well. So water, this global linker, and this basically, this picture sort of depicts where we are today. That the ocean, the industries, water recycling, water purification, agriculture, all of those things are interlinked. And the main linker there is water. our sustainable development goals, if we take the line through all of them, all 17 of them, water will be a central part to a greater or lesser extent in all of those. If it's peace and justice, water will be there, and we can take examples from peace and justice. Availability of water. If water is not available for one community and another community has it, it's going to lead to a war, it's going to lead to unpeaceful interactions. So any of those examples or any of those SDGs one can go back into, and you'll have water as a central part. But there's Sustainable Development Goal number 6, clean water and health, which is a critical part. And that is where much of research is happening within this university, within various research fields. Sociology, the component. In law, there's a component. In natural sciences, obviously, this is where we are at. There's a huge part of our work centralized around SDG 6. But there are others. There is well, life in the water, life on land, climate change, predictions that we are making in terms of where the weather is going. So water is that global linker. Now, if we look at sanitation, this map shows the status of sanitation. More than 10 years ago, yes, I know, but that hasn't changed much. I'll show you now what I mean by it. It has changed, but not like a real major shift. And if you look at that map, you see Africa is standing out as an area where below 50, in some cases below 75% of those nations have not much good sanitation facilities available. Now, linked to sanitation can be all sorts of things. And I started out by referring to the Middle Ages, where sanitation wasn't much of an issue because there was a lot of water, but it came back to haunt those nations and haunt those cities. So if you look at this map, you'll see that exactly that the poor sanitation is linked to an increased mortality rate for those nations. That overlap with sanitation and health. And water is the main part of that. Let me see, water pollution is the main part of that. Because Central Africa, there's lots of water. But sanitation is that link there. So the threat and challenge, threats and challenges of water pollution per se. If there are contaminated water that is used in agriculture, in modern agriculture, and I'm not even talking about subsistence agriculture in this case, but it could be exactly the same. If that water is used for irrigation, it will have a health negative effect. If it's used for animal watering, it will have a direct effect. If it is used in, for example, milking, where the udders of the cows are sprayed with poorly treated water or contaminated water, it will have a negative health effect. But then there's also the direct use of water contamination, where in some areas, some of parts of Africa which I've shown, some parts of South Africa as well, where untreated water as is, it's all that's available. And because it's a critical resource, we cannot go without it. That water is taken. In some cases, it is treated. And there are traditional ways of treating it, but that's another tangent, another story for another day. But properly treated water, definitely that family, if it's not properly treated, the family that's dependent on that water, that has to drink it, where baby formulas times are made directly with that water without it being cooked, will have negative effects. But then there's also for recreation and for religious use, where water is a central part of those activities. So, in terms of the threats, and there's specifically South African scenario, our cities could be, and our cities are these highly developed areas, but close to it, which is also part of the city, are informal and settlements where the availability of water and the availability of sanitation is impacted. There's also the waste that is generated, where we take waste for granted, we put it in the bin, it's been taken out by somebody, and along comes the service that's provided by the municipality, and off it goes into landfill. And we forget about it. It's out there, it's out of sight, it's out of mind. We are also blessed, we have this wonderful agricultural economy. NAMPO is taking place at the moment in Waterville, and there's a lot of talk about water, availability of water, electricity, etc., etc. But when you have a single population or a single species, we have a single species population, then they are prone to get infections, and those infections need to be treated. They are pests, they are diseases, and those need to be treated. What do we use? We use these pesticides and antimicrobial substances as treatment when there's disease. But we've been clever, we found out that some of these antimicrobial substances will enhance the growth of these animals. That's been used in that scenario. We'll stop there with that. But we are blessed with this mining, wonderful mining. And some of you guys are working within the mining and the hydrology of mining, etc. So wonderful. But the price that we pay is that the water that is being used, the water that is harvested, gets polluted in the process. So that is some of the threats on our raw water quality. Some of the main messages that we get from various reports, and this is a new environmental program report that took a snapshot of water quality across the world. And what is definitely, and it is highlighted in introductions, in the foreword in those reports, is that good quality water is essential for survival. If you want good health, good quality water, but organic and also inorganic, microbial pollution of our aquifers, of our rivers, of our dams is a major, major problem for Africa. And that is due to increased waste loading because of the size of the populations that are growing, so there's more and more waste, and there's less being done with this waste of harvesting some of the organics, some of the resources that are present in that waste. It's just thrown. Take water, take it, and take it somewhere else. Into our rivers, with the rivers, into the sea, off it goes, and But as part of that waste is also pathogens and chemicals that were never there before 1940 odd. Some of these chemicals are recent ones, and they are emerging chemicals for some major issues that could be aspects in the future. If these emerging contaminants remain part of a water mix, it will definitely come back. Like with the ancient populations, it will come back to bite us. Then specifically the antimicrobials that comes out of these nice wastewater treatment plants that supposed to take out organic materials, get rid of it. So, and then also agricultural return flows. And if we go back to this, we see that flush toilets, that's a huge part of the sanitation in South Africa. But there's this other part, the on-site flush toilets, where it's used in septic tanks, also VIP and eco toilets. The question is, and I've referred to it, that that's organic matter. Is there not an opportunity in that organic matter? And we've had a project with some German colleagues where we've looked at sanitation options around Potchefstroom. Those are some of the sanitation options that is available. And down here is one of the students that's collecting those organic materials and converting it into biogas. And that biogas can be converted into electricity. And if you have this huge constituent, then there is definitely an opportunity. Opportunity in terms of a circular economy. When we talk about the circular economy, and you write exams about circular economy and give the definitions for the circular economy. But that's an opportunity with that circular economy where organic matter can be reused. But for each of those steps, there needs to be proper OHS in place. Another opportunity for studies, for example. The activated sludge, 1913, it's the first time it was introduced. Wonderful process, works very well for inland systems. All that influent, whatever comes in, must be treated properly, and the effluent that leaves there must comply to certain standards. We've seen an opportunity there from our research group. We said, okay, right, how much do we understand this process? It has been treated like a black box for a long time. Can't we do something with it? So we said, okay, if we understand the microbiology, stuff that we can easily measure using a microscope, ordinary microscope with some stains, nothing difficult, where one can teach a junior lab assistant at the wastewater treatment plant to handle it, and some other matters around it, then they can make certain decisions. But we have brought in the other wonderful part where we extracted DNA and we use DNA technologies to develop a catalog where we can have on the one hand, the microscopy, and if things go wrong and if things go right, what would that look like? And also the DNA based. So that is what is currently being developed. That was the opportunity that we saw. This a very convenient product. I mean, most of what we have around us has a bit of plastic in it. And it's been developed over a long time, and there's lots of it that is being developed, and that is out there. This is what happened to much of our plastics, a lot of the plastics. quite a bit is being recycled. And we go into spa, and they have these nice brown carry bags where they say, this used to be brown bottles. Wonderful. The concept is really wonderful. Now, this is Raiza's, the master that she just completed, focusing on the policy. Now, the study started out in 2019, 2020, we were going to go out into the ocean to test this. The coastal cities are allowed to let pre-treated, primary treated water out into the oceans. Those are all the cities. We couldn't get to those cities. So we had to, she had to intervene and set up some experiments. What we do know is that there's a lot of plastics that are being generated, and these plastics, the increase from 2010 to 2050, etc., or 2025 is definitely, 2025 is around the corner. Huge increases in the amounts of plastics that is being generated. So she tested it, and I'll come back to it. But there's also this age, the age of antibiotics, where antibiotics were first brought onto the market in the 1940s, and that has resulted in us understanding more and more of how these antibiotics work, and it also resulted in the increase of life expectancy. Nowadays, we can go for an operation, very inclusive operation, and come out of there, a hip replacement, knee replacements. Antibiotics are there to make sure that we survive. And we have this option now, getting up to 70 years of age, and for survival for longer. But these bacteria, these microbes, have also evolved with the plastic, the antibiotic exposure. They have evolved to become resistant to those. That's what life is. If there's an issue, there's a pressure, then there's an evolution of. So, and we understand what is happening there, and we can do all sorts of wonderful things with it. But what we also know is that the antimicrobial substances that we take in, that ampicillin that you take for, you mustn't take it for headaches, that you take for infections, then there's a huge percentage of that that is being excreted and lands out as part of the excrete. And where does it go? Into the water, into the sewage system, into the wastewater treatment plants. So that's that whole cycle. And water is that very important, the transporter of these antimicrobial substances. But when you consider that the policy says that that is all treatment that is required. In other words, take out the solids and let the solids run out into the ocean, because the ocean is big and there's going to be dilution and there's sunlight, and all of that is going to allow for degradation. That is what the perception is about that. But with carefully designed experiments, Raiza showed that these microplastics, plastics smaller than 5 millimeter, sometimes even smaller, that when you study them, when you look at them under the microscope, electron microscope, you see all these organisms that live on it. And that these organisms that survive, they set up these experiments to demonstrate the scenario of when it goes out into the oceans, and they survive. And there's all sorts of other wonderful things that she conducted about. So we know that this preliminary treated water going out into the oceans is an issue. But we need some more studies on the viable, those microorganisms that can grow, that can survive there, as well as the newer technologies. And I'm not going to go into the newer technologies, but the DNA-based technologies, like what we've done now for the COVID tests. and COVID-based wastewater treatment plants where they isolated the nucleic acid materials and they used molecular methods, PCR, and everybody knows about PCR. Use PCR to determine whether it's present or not. And even at times when you had to go for some blood or where they put it down your nose first, it's not that bad anymore, but then they use that method. So we know that these microorganisms survive extended periods in these microplastics, and when these microplastics are in seawater, and that these pathogenic, the microorganisms that can cause various diseases. Nisha has talked about typhoid and cholera, similar scenario, that they survive and they get dispersed into the oceans, into the seas. And imagine you get out onto the beach, and you get that exposure of some of that microplastics. I'm not going to go into the antibiotic resistance mechanisms, but we understand that as well. We've got methods of determining that. But we need more studies, in situ studies, going into the ocean, collecting this information, the microplastics there, as evidence that the hypothesis that WISA brought forward is either supported or refuted. We need to revisit our treatment options and policy. Another opportunity would be to get these microbes. Now that we know that they are there, we live on these microplastics, ones that can break down the microplastics and assimilate it, not just degrade it into smaller pieces, into nanoplastics, but to get them actually assimilated and mineralized completely. Another opportunity is removal of these antibiotic residues and pathogenic organisms. There's been a whole focus on the pathogenic organisms and some focus on technologies for removal of antibiotics. Can one do it together? There's a question. Perhaps we need a great mind coming out of here and say, I thought about it, and perhaps if you use the trains together like this, and a solution, actually get the removal, mineralization of the plastics and the antibiotics in one go with very little energy required. Imagine if you get load shedding while the process is going. What we do know is that our wet areas gets wetter and the dry areas. That's reality of what is happening in terms of we're seeing how the changes in our seasons. When I arrived here 20 years ago, we could say May we start, it's a dry season starting, and the dry season will end around September, and then the wet season will start end of September, October, and go until March, April. There are many studies that we've done on seasonal basis. You can go back and have a look at it. I mean, it rained yesterday in May, might be raining in June as well. So there's definitely these changes. So the future of water, let's not be scared. Let's handle these challenges. Think about it. Think outside the box. Let's address policies if it has to be addressed. Let's speak up about policies. Investment in new technologies, we should not be afraid. There shouldn't be a fear of investing in new technologies. Investigate this. And my message out to you is to seize the opportunities. There are these opportunities. And if we do not, we're going to go back to those ancient times where we don't understand what is happening now with water. This is one concern, one major concern. This is the last one. One major concern, and that is just on antibiotic resistance. This is the prediction. By 2050, there will be 10 million people dying annually because of antimicrobial resistance. There will be. That is if we don't have interventions, if we don't stop the time, if we don't get the research on it, if we don't get our minds applied to it, if we don't see the connections, keep it outside of each other, away from each other, that will 10 million people, look where there is about Africa, us. It's going to be a thing. So people won't be able to go for the knee replacements and hip replacements unless they extremely rich. That will be the reality that we do. You guys are going to be the old people by the way. We're going to be the output of the system. So I want to thank you for, these are some of our partners within drinking water project with some of this information. So, thank you very much. Thanks for listening to this.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would first like to thank Prof Carlos for introducing us today, and also the organizers here today for allowing us to speak. So today I'm going to present with the topic in mind, water yesterday, today and tomorrow. I'm going to take a closer look at the legislative history of South African law and how it impacted water-related authorizations. So most of you here probably do not know me, so just a quick round of introductions. My name is Marco Morelli. As Pablo mentioned, I'm an alumni of the North-West University. Where I finalized my undergrad and postgrad in environmental sciences, specializing in hydrology and geohydrology. So I'm very much where most of you are sitting here today in the future. And for the last 6 years, I've been working as an environmental consultant for a consultancy company named Molmex. And just to add to that, what Molmex does, or environmental consultancy company, it works with all the environmental legislations pertaining water and environmental, and encompassing specialist studies that include GIS, DMR tenure, and also health and safety. So just to discuss the outcome of today's presentation. So we're going to have a brief look at the legislative history of South African water law. Why is it important? We're going to have a look at the current legislation, what changed, and my personal experiences with dealing with water use authorizations. And then we're going to have a look at the future. Just a quick disclaimer, the aim of this presentation is only to highlight the major changes in a water law. It doesn't encompass every act in legislation, just the major changes. So let's start with the legislative history of South African water law, or defined in the title as yesterday. So the first major water law was the Irrigation and Conservation of Waters Act 8 of 1912. I'm just going to briefly discuss what it's pertaining. So during the colonial era, water was considered a common resource accessible to all. Population growth and economical development arose the need for a structural approach towards water management, and this led to the first significant legislation, which is the Water Act of 1912. It established principles of state ownership for the first time of water resources, but the main purpose of the Water Act of 1912 is to promote development of land for irrigation. And it was mostly localized to riparian owners, meaning land adjacent to rivers or streams. And they only defined public water under the Act of 1912. I'm going to talk later about the difference between public water and private water. So if you can look at the timeline of the outcome of this presentation, We're starting with yesterday in the past, and it's the Act 12 of 1912. So the highlights of it is it only involves irrigation. It only speaks to public water, being rivers and streams, and it requires special acts for non-riparian water users, meaning water users that fall outside of the riparian area. It had limited control. The only control was by irrigation boards, and it didn't govern control in terms of water rights or entitlements. Only irrigation boards that handle with the volume of water extracted for certain areas being declared as irrigation boards. So now we're going to take a look at the next major milestone in water law, being the Water Act of 54 of 1956. It was a substantial revision from the previous Water Act of 1912. And why? Because it introduced for the first time industrial and domestic water uses, not only looking at irrigation. So the 1956 Act also emphasizes the need for conservation and imposed penalties for wasteful and inefficient use of water. Under this act, also the Department of Water Affairs and Forestry was established at the later end of 1994, as most of you have heard before. And they also defined private water and public water. So under this act, where the 1912 Act only talked about public water, being rivers and streams, it also spoke about public water. Private water, where private water is water found on a private individual's property, like a well or a spring or a borehole. So now we're looking into groundwater being included into water legislation for the first time. And it also introduced subterranean government water control areas. So in the 1912 Act, only have irrigation boards for rivers and streams. But now, with the 1956 Act, it also had subterranean government water control areas. And it was mostly localized for areas which had dolomitic compartments. And the reason for control for those areas is to prevent over-abstraction from the groundwater resource that would, as we all know, result to sinkholes, if we look at Ventersdorp, for example. This act also allowed the transfer of water rights and entitlements, which is important going forward in this presentation. So if you had water rights from a river, you could transfer the water rights to a non-riparian water user via a court order. So you still had to get permission, but it was permitted. And it also established water user associations as part of governments, which just added on to irrigation boards. So water user association is just an expansion of the irrigation boards, taking areas or properties outside of riparian properties as well. So let's look at the timeline continued, still under the banner of yesterday. So we looked at the 1912 Act and we looked at the 1956 Act. So major changes is the one only spoke to irrigation, the other one spoke to irrigation, domestic and industrial water uses. The one only defined public water, the other one defined public and private water. The 1956 Act also looked at quality, where the 1912 only looked at quantity. So it was the first time the legislation also took into account the quality of water instead of just the quantity of water being abstracted or allowed. And we also saw the establishment of water user association and government groundwater control areas as part of governments. So by now, at this point of the presentation, you might ask yourself, why is past legislation important? So we need to take a look at past legislation to understand where we're heading and why is it still important in today's legislation. So let's move on to why is it important in the context of today. So if you look at the current water legislation that we are governed under, it's the National Water Act of 1998. So the National Water Act of 1998 defines 4 major types of water use. The first one is called the Schedule 1 water use. Basically, in short, the Schedule 1 water use is a water use that doesn't require authorization or a registration. The reason being is the National Water Act was promulgated in 98 and the Constitution was promulgated in 96, which allowed all South Africans the right to water for drinking and domestic use. Therefore, domestic use does not require authorization or a registration. It also speaks about other water uses as small-scale gardening, rain harvesting, water for emergencies if there's a fire, recreational use like swimming pools and livestock watering, excluding feedlots. So the next type of authorization that we're looking at is general authorizations. So a general authorization is almost like a car learner's instead of a full license. It allows you to use water, but it has certain limits. So, and it's generalized for the region and also the size of the property. So a general authorization can only be obtained in certain regions of South Africa. And now we look at why the legislation of yesterday is prevalent for today. So the next water use that we're going to look at is existing lawful water uses, or what they call ELUs. So existing lawful water uses means any water use that was exercised in a 2-year period before the promulgation of the 98 Water Act. And the reason why existing lawful water uses exist is not to penalize water uses that were lawful via any governance prior to the new Water Act. So existing lawful waters can still continue to use their water use as they did prior to 98 without being penalized to adhere to new standards and regulations under the 98 Water Act. The last form of authorization under the current legislation is a full water use license, which I'm going to discuss later in this presentation. So let's look at the current legislation today, which I briefly discussed in the previous slide with regards to the water uses. So the last water use that I touched on is water use licenses. So in short, what is a water use license? A water use license is a legal document issued by the Department of Water and Sanitation, which is the governing body, that grants the holder the right to use specific quantities of water for a particular use. A water use license also has a set of conditions that has to be adhered to, and it also places a restriction on the amount of water or the type of water uses being exercised. As you can see in the table below, Section 21 of the National Water Act outlines the type of water uses that require authorization. I'm not going to go through each and every one, but this is just important to outline that if we talk about water use licensing or water use governance, we're not only talking about the taking of water. As you can see, that's only nearly one water use, where the National Water Act lists 11 water uses, which can also include the storing of water. If you look at C&I, it talks about the impending of diverting the flow of a water course or altering the bed bank's course or characteristics, which would be in-stream dams. If you build an in-stream dam, you can think for yourself the impact it will have for downstream water uses. So that also requires a water use license. It's not only just the taking of water. So what changed since 1956, which was the previous water legislation, to the water legislation of today? So at first we look at the legal framework. So in the 1956 Act, we talked about public and private water, where under the previous legislation, there was still such a thing as private water, where if water found on your own personal property, you can very much use that water for your own personal use, excluding if it falls outside of a subterranean control area, where the 98 Water Act, which is important, they introduce the adaptation of a public trustee approach, where the state is acting as the custodian of the water resource on behalf of the nation. So that is very important. So if you own a property in South Africa, a farm or what have you, it's very important to know that you are the surface owner of that property, meaning groundwater found underground does not belong to the property owner. That is governed by the Department of Water and Sanitation. The same with minerals, for example. If you find a diamond on your farm, that diamond belongs to DMRE, unfortunately. So the next difference between the 98 and 56 Water Act is water allocation, where the 56 Water Act predominantly focused on first in time, first in right principle, which favored water users that first settled on riparian land, where the 98 Water Act introduced the system of water licensing and require the water users to apply for a license, and it takes into account social and economical and other environmental factors, not just the availability of water. So just to continue with regards to differences, you get water resource planning, where the 1956 Water Act didn't have comprehensive water resource planning, where the National Water Act of 98 mandated the development of catchment management strategies and associations, which aided in the water resource planning and governance. And also you have public participation and stakeholder involvement. We're under the 56 Water Act, public participation was not a central feature, but under the 98 Water Act, it is a requirement to engage in interested and affected parties to deliver their inputs before gaining a water use license application or water use license. So just to continue with the last difference is environmental considerations. So other environmental considerations under the 56 Act was not explicitly addressed, where under the 98 Act, it very much incorporates other forms of legislation and government. So if I can give an example, if you have a farm and you would like to abstract water for irrigating a center pivot, then yes, obviously, of course, you need a water use license to abstract water to irrigate the center pivot, but there are other environmental legislations that should be incorporated into the water use license. That could be if you look at NEMA, if you clear vegetation more than 20 hectares, you require environmental authorization to do so, to ensure that you're not removing endangered species. The same with CARA, which is the Conservation Act, which governs plough certificates. Before you can establish a center pivot, you need a plough certificate to ensure the soil is suitable for whatever activity that you're planning to establish. And why is that important? It's to not to ensure that the wasteful use of water is not being presented. So the soil needs to be suitable for the water use license and the irrigation proposed. So if I can continue with the timeline, we are now at the present, which is the 1998 Water Act. As you can see, the clear differences is government being the custodians as a whole, moving away from private water. It established the reserve, which is the minimum amount of water necessary for maintaining ecological health. It takes into account socio-economic factors into the decision-making as part of the water use license application, public participation, as I spoke about earlier, and incorporation of other environmental legislation. So now I'm going to move on to my personal experiences with regards to the current water use license applications from 98 onwards. And I'm first going to take a look at advances in what water use license applications made prior post the National Water Act of 98. So first I'm going to look at the submission of applications. Originally, applications were submitted as a hard copy document, which resulted in its own problem, being applications being lost or misplaced by regional offices. Where applications since 2015 moved to an online application process, which allows the applicant just to keep track of the application process electronically. It still has shortcomings. There is a delay in the application process, in the several phases of the application process progressing as it should, due to limited assessing official working in governments. So each time you lodge an application, it has to be assigned to assessing official, and sometimes there's not the availability of enough assessing officials to deal with the amount of applications being lodged. So there is still some shortfalls with regards to the electronic application process. Okay, now we can look at the assessing period. Originally, the assessing period was 300 days of assessment post-submission, which now has been cut down to 90 days of assessment via the online application process. It's also still has shortcomings. When it was first announced that water use licenses are going to be processed within 90 days, people had the misconception that it takes you 90 days to get a water use license. That 90-day process only starts after the submission of a water use license application. So you still need to take into account the time it takes to consult with organs of state, surrounding landowners, the compilation of the application, specialist inputs, etc. And after 90 days of assessment, the Department of Water and Sanitation needs to reach a decision, and only after that they will send the recommendations for licensing. So it's still not a perfect process. It doesn't take 90 days. It still takes you a long time to actually get the water use license. And the next part of the advances in water use license application is guidelines. So originally, the only guideline there was to water use license application was following the National Water Act of 98, which didn't really specify the guidelines for report writing, which has since changed in 2017, where the regulations were published with regards to the requirements of water use license application. But it also made assessment of water use license applications much stricter. And it also required more specialized inputs with regards to the 2017 regulations. So let's take a look at compliance and enforcement. So advances in technology has also changed the way compliance and enforcement governs illegalities with regards to water use and water use licensing. Just to take an example, in the periods of prior to 98, the land satellite imagery had a resolution of only 30 meters. So it was very difficult to identify features and irrigation and the places of irrigation, where if you look at the current land satellite imagery, the resolution is much higher and you can clearly see developments happening on properties and when they occurred. So it's much harder to shy away from when water uses has been exercised without authorization. Compliance and enforcement also introduced additional legislation. For example, existing lawful water users was exempt from licensing conditions, only being told to stick to allocated volumes of abstraction, where since 2017 they gazetted act stating that even though it is existing lawful water use, you have to install metering devices to monitor the abstraction of the water, even though you have existing lawful water use, and that abstracted volume should be kept for record keeping. So additional legislation has also aided with compliance and enforcement. Some shortcomings with regards to compliance and enforcement. It remains an unstaffed division. I recently spoke to an official working in compliance and enforcement for the Department of Water and Sanitation, who informed me he's responsible for roughly 6,000 properties for his catchment area, which he needs to govern. So there's still very much understaffed division. We can also look at financial constraints. A lot of these compliance and enforcement officers within the Department of Water and Sanitation have to book vehicles via Avis, and in the past they had subcontractors to do pre-assessment for them, but ever since 2017 they had to take over that task as well. So there is some constraints with regards to compliance and enforcement. Obviously, corruption also plays a role in compliance and enforcement. And most recently, load shedding has also increased illegalities where due to the long periods of load shedding, people that have water use licenses to abstract a certain amount of water can do so. So what they have to do is they have to store the water when electricity is available. And for them to store large amounts of water, they have to build dams, and most of them build these dams without authorization. So they build illegal dams, which also triggers compliance and enforcement. So some inconsistencies and shift of focus with current water use licenses. So if I can first talk about inconsistencies. So like I previously mentioned, depending on what water management area the activity falls, it goes to different regional offices for assessment. So different regional offices assess differently, and within those regional offices, there's also different assessing officials that also assess differently. So you do get some inconsistencies across the board with regards to water use license application. Some of those inconsistencies include water uses requiring authorization. Some regional offices deems, for example, JoJo tanks insufficient to be authorized, where some regional offices make mention that because minimum storage of water is part of the whole process, it needs to be included in the governance. You have geohydrology being part of the groundwater division. Geohydrology has some inconsistencies where some regional offices look at the property boundary as the catchment area instead of the actual aquifer with regards to determining the reserve. And they also put limits on the abstraction rates. Some abstraction time frames. Some regional offices only allow 8 hours of abstraction, even though a full geohydrological assessment has been conducted stating that the water is sustainable even up to 24 hours of abstraction. Then you have also site visits where some regional offices prefer locality maps and not going to site, and comments from in-house specialists might differ, like the geohydrological assessment studies. So in my experience, a shift in focus, all water use license application has an increase in the need for civil engineering design. This has in part have to do with the large tailings facility that burst in Jagersfontein. So that very much triggered the department to include all waste structure facilities to be signed off by a registered civil engineer, and also include stormwater management plans. And there's also an influx of incorporation with other legal legislative requirements, like I previously explained with the example of the farm. So let's have a look at the future. So first, I'm going to discuss the legislative future with regards to water law. So currently there's a National Water and Sanitation Master Plan of 2030 in working. As you can see on the screen, it basically outlines the three sectors, the three volumes of the proposed legislation of the future. I'm not going to go in too much depth with it because it's not finalized yet, and it still adds public interests. So, but what can we expect from future legislation, having taken a look at the past, the current, and the 2013 master plan of the Department of Water and Sanitation? So what we can expect from future legislations is strengthening water resource management. This includes stricter governance. Some of you might know the Section 24G process under NEMA, which is a rectification process if listed activity under NEMA has been exercised without authorization. There is no such process in place with regards to water authorization or legislation, where that is currently a process in place or being developed. And this, of course, will increase the strictness of water use license applications. Other things to expect is addressing water security and climate change. We could foresee the collapse of existing lawful water uses, considering that a large number of water uses in South Africa still fall under the governance of the existing lawful water uses, where existing lawful water uses always was defined as water use that can be exercised until called upon by a governing body to apply for a water use license. So up until now, no legislation has passed stating that existing lawful water users need to apply for water use license, but considering that they are planning to change legislation and amendments, I think it's safe to say that all existing lawful water users are going to have to be changed over to new governance. And also addressing water security and climate change, it can result to desalination plants at coastal regions. I'll get to that part in the next slide. The protection of water quality and ecosystems, the amendment of legislation, and the change of raw water charges. So if you apply for a water use license and you receive a water use license for the use of water, the abstraction of water being Section 21A, you are billed according to the raw water charges that change annually. So it's very much like the billing you receive at your house or your flats, where if you open the taps, you receive a bill for the amount of water you use. If you fall under a water use license, you get also a similar bill for the use of water. So what's going to change in the future with regards to raw water charges? Currently, there are only raw water charges for the abstraction of water, taking of water, be it groundwater or surface water, where they are planning to implement raw water charges also for the disposal of water or wastewater. So if you have a water use license under, let's say, for example, section 21G, which is the disposal of waste, and you dispose the waste onto a piece of land or via pipeline, in the future you are gonna receive a bill for that as well. So yes, just an image I took from the National Integrated Water Information System. If you take anything away from this presentation, take away this system that is open source and can be viewed online by the Department of Water and Sanitation's website, and it gives you up-to-date real-time information with regards to the current state of South African water and the allocation thereof and the availability. Considering that it's the groundwater division today, I took, just for an example, groundwater availability status. So as you can see, the two red water management areas indicate water management areas where the amount of water being recharged for those areas has already been allocated. So there's more water being used in those two water management areas than can be recharged in terms of groundwater. You can also see the number of quaternary catchments that are fully allocated and over allocated. And we can expect in the future for this number to rise as an increase of population growth and an increase of water users also increases. And that might, like the gentleman in the back asked earlier, that might lead to desalination plants being reinvested at coastal regions. So yes, just a graph of the raw water charges I spoke about earlier. As you can see, the raw water charges is dependent on in what water management area you fall, and the tariffs is being billed per cent per cubic meters of water being used. That's just an example. So now the hot topic of today, when we take a look at the future. Previously, I mentioned the transfer of waters, the transfer of water rights that was permitted under the 56 Water Act. So the 98 Water Act also made provision for the temporary or the full transfer of water rights and entitlements. But since January of 2018, the Department of Water and Sanitation released an internal letter stating that individuals trading water privately misinterpreted the right to transfer water. It was intended to transfer water rights from the same water user if the water resource remains the same. For example, if a water user owns more than one riparian property, he can transfer water rights from his own property to his own property if the water resource remains the same, being the river. Let's for say example, it's a borehole, then a pipeline has to be laid from the borehole that has the authorization, because water rights is always linked to the property. So if you transfer water rights from, let's say, groundwater resource being a borehole, you can't use a different borehole. It has to be the same water resource. So the Department of Water and Sanitation has decided that they are no longer going to process water transfer that is being transferred from one water user to another water user. And the reason being is it's being done for financial gain from the private sector, which they see is trading with a state commodity of a water resource. But as you can see in this extract, farmers selling water has won a court case in the Constitutional Court that found agricultural water can be transferred. So we can expect that in the future that amendments in legislation would most likely see a change in the wording and the picture to once again disallow the trade, the personal trade of water rights. So here we have our timeline completed, where we looked at the legislative history of yesterday, today, and tomorrow, where we can expect in future legislations the amendment of the legislation, new raw water charges being added, stricter governance when it comes to water use license application, rectification process in motion, the call to action to place existing local water uses, and we can expect the water transfers to wage on. So that's basically my presentation in a nutshell. So to conclude, the legislative history of South African water law is a testament to the country's journey towards equitable and sustainable water resource management. From the early days of colonial rule to the present, legislation has evolved to address social, economic, and environmental challenges. Today, the principles of equitable access, ecological sustainability, and public participation continues to shape South African water law, ensuring the responsibility, stewardship, and of this invaluable resource. Just some credits. I would like to do a special thanks to all the organizers that arranged this event, and also to the book I used to gain all the information for this presentation with regards to the history of water law. So that's all from my side. Thank you.
There was just an issue there. So, okay. Thank you very much. Sorry for that. Okay, this is what we're going to talk about today. The presentation will start talking about the current perspective, looking at the whole world, what is happening, and then zoom into South Africa. Talk about the reasons why we're failing to tap into this natural resource. Talk about the effects of bad practices that we're seeing. Also talk about the observation from our projects. We're also going to talk about the changing situation. How can we change the situation to make it better for the future? I'll show you some case studies, and then we'll be concluding. In 2010, the Institute of Groundwater Management, the international one, produced this map. So actually, they were showing that, you know what, by the year 2025, countries are going to struggle with water. They divided these countries into three. Countries that will struggle with physical water, as well as countries that are going to struggle with economic water. The countries that you see there that are in blue are the countries that won't have any problems in 2025. The countries that you see in orange are the countries that are going to have a problem with economic water scarcity. And the countries that you see in red, that's when we're going to have a problem with physical water. What physical water means is that you have your dams, and the water that is there is not enough to feed the community. What economic water means is that you have water, but you don't have the means to take it to the people, or the money to build your pipelines and everything. So as you can see, South Africa was projected to be a country that is going to struggle a lot by the year 2025. And when this came out, it looked as though the year 2025 was in 50 years' time. But today, we know that is in less than 2 years, will be in the year 2025. And we are already feeling the effects of that. I wanted to just give an overview of the global water of what is happening. If you look at that, you realize that 97.5% of the water that we have in the whole world is seawater. So that means we cannot access that water. We cannot just drink it as it is. It's salt water. So we're only left with about 2.5%, which we say that is fresh water. We can use that water. So the problem with that 2.5% is that 79% of that is held in your ice caps, in your glaciers. So still, you cannot use that water. So we're only left between 1% of fresh water that we can say we can access it. But out of that 21%, 1% is surface water, and 20% is your groundwater. So this is proving that groundwater is your solution. If you have any problems with drought, groundwater will be your solution for the future. And groundwater, you need to take care of it because it's also recharging your surface water. If you don't take into account or manage groundwater very well, you're going to have problems with your surface water. I went to the National Groundwater Strategy and checked how much groundwater do we have that we can use and how much groundwater are we using currently. Well, the strategy says that we have about 10,000 million cubes of groundwater that we can use. And out of that, currently we are using only about 4,000 million cubes. And it's still below that 10,000. So the blue line is indicating to you that that is the water that we can use. And then in terms of drought, that is the water that we can use, about 7,500 million cubes. So based on that strategy, we are still not using all the groundwater that we have. So we can still tap into groundwater. And your surface water, which is our friend, the same we have about 12,000 million cubes of surface water per annum that we can use. And currently, almost 80% of that is allocated. So it means that we have a problem with surface water. Hence, we started talking about the Lesotho Highlands water coming into South Africa because surface water we are utilizing it. Everyone is using that, and we are running out of surface water. So now, why should we use groundwater? Groundwater is a proximal source. What that means is that you can develop it within the vicinity of the village. You don't have to build pipelines like 200 kilometers away. We actually had one project where the engineers would say it was, you know what, we need, it was for Khanisa village, if I remember very well. We need to get water for Khanisa, but we have to get it 200 kilometers away. So we said to them, wait a little bit. What we need to do is that let us study the area and just check if there's a possibility of drilling boreholes. And we found that there's a possibility of drilling boreholes, and about 20 boreholes were drilled there in Khanisa. And that project was cancelled, and it was going to cost a lot of money. And groundwater is also resistant to the effects of drought. During the Cape Town Day Zero, one of the solutions they said was that let us go drill boreholes. So they started drilling boreholes to solve the Cape Town story because they understood that you can have problem with surface water, but groundwater is not affected as much by drought. Your quality of groundwater is usually very good. I checked 300 samples that we have in our database, and I realized that only 10% of them needed to be treated very well. But the other ones, you can just drink it as it is. And you can develop your groundwater incrementally. Let's say the municipality does not have money this year. They can say we are drilling 2 boreholes, and then the following financial year, you drill another 2 boreholes, and then the following one you drill until you have a well filled. But with surface water, you cannot do that because you cannot build half a dam and move to the other half of a dam. You can't do that. But with groundwater, you can develop it incrementally. And then the cost of developing groundwater is very low compared to surface water. Now, since now we said, here's a beautiful resource that can supply us with water, why are we failing to use it? Why do we have so much problems? Why is because the source is invisible. Unlike surface water, anybody can go to the dam and get water, can go to the river and get water with a bucket because it's surface water, but groundwater is totally different because it's invisible, you cannot see it. Lack of hydrologists or groundwater specialists or groundwater modelers in the public sector. What's happening now, you have directors making plans about water supply, but no one stands for groundwater. No one says groundwater is an alternative. So even the budgets that are meant for groundwater, they are being used for something else because in government now, all the geohydrologists, all the specialists have moved out to private sector. lack of operation and maintenance. We've been to a lot of areas and we realized that even if you give them an operation and maintenance plan, it is not being followed. And one of the, I think it was in one of our project whereby in not the radio, but I think it was in Vomarasa, whereby the politicians, we went with the politicians as well as the municipal officials. And then they will say, we have a government farm. So this government farm, please drain water here. And then we asked them, how do you know that this is the best place to drill for a town? And then they said, you know what, politically, that's where you must drill. And the pressure from the community, that's where you must drill. We left that project and someone else came and drilled there. And then they got about 20 boreholes, it was dry. Because they're drilling on a hard rock. You cannot drill on a hard rock like that. Because you need an aquifer to get water. Hence, we say that the lack of water specialists in government sector leads to that. I'm going to say this, but maybe it should stay here. This is Zeras. We are quoting Zeras that Zeras does not have water. The reservoirs in Zeras are not filling up. Please check what is happening to the well field. We went to where the boreholes are. These boreholes have been in operation maybe for over 20 years. And this is what we found. These are the boreholes that are feeding the whole town. And looking at them, you realize that there's no operation and maintenance. There was a leak. I took a 25-liter bucket there just to measure the leak, just to see. Because the person we found on the ground said to us that it's been leaking like that for the last 10 years since I've been here. And I realized that it takes about 4 minutes to fill that 25-liter bucket. So that would mean in an hour, we have 1,500 liters being lost. And then we went to this one. We asked what is happening with that. And then they said to us, the supervisor took a pump 6 months ago to fix it. And then he never came back. And then we went to the other one, we were asking, what is happening there? Because that should be a bulk water supply. They said, you know what, when we were changing the rods, some of the rods fell into the borehole, so but we could not take them out. So we just went into our store, check what pump we have, and we just put that pump there. So everything in that well field is broken. So no operation and maintenance. That's what's leading to the town of heavy water. Okay, the pump house. The pump house is in Khanyesa. In January, we went to Khanyesa to do hydrocensus. So while we were there, we saw one borehole, and this borehole was blocked. And we said, okay, we're going to implement it for re-drilling. In March, when we came, we found that the pump house is built on that dry borehole. And we asked ourselves, what is happening? And then we bring the pump testing guys to come and check. And then they said, this borehole is dry. So you have contractors going on site, building pump houses and claiming from the municipality. And the community thinks that now there's a project that is happening. Why are we not having water? And then they start blaming groundwater, but actually the problem is not the groundwater, but the problem is the infrastructure. Now, all these bad practices, what are the effects of? All the effects of them? The lowering of the water table. If you don't manage it very well, you're not only affecting groundwater, but you're also affecting your surface water. Because once your water table goes down, drops, even your streams there, you might not have water in your streams. Increased cost, because for us to drill now, we have to drill deeper. So the cost will come high. Reduced surface water supplies, yes, because of the decrease in the water level. Land subsidies. What's happening is that you have your soil, and then between your soils you have water. So once you remove that water, there's bound to be a shift in the soil. Water quality concerns. In your dam, the higher water has a good quality. If it goes lower and lower and lower, and then you have a bad quality water. As it happened in Morocco, then in Mafia. And then there was a community survey that was done in 2016. Just to check in the whole of North-West, what is happening? And then they found out that less than 50% of households are happy with the quality of water services they are getting. So we're having a problem in North-West province. I'm not sure about the other province because 80% of my projects are in North-West. Therefore, the challenges, and these challenges as they are also listed at the municipal websites. But the number one challenge that they have is a lack of safe and reliable water supply. So this is what we have observed from our projects. Wherever we have went, the story is the same. We have old and decayed infrastructure due to poor maintenance. You have no operation and maintenance plan. Things are just happening. If the borehole breaks, then they go to fix it, but there's no plan as to how to make sure that it doesn't break. The groundwater level monitoring is not done. You request that from the municipality, the water levels, you won't get there. Wrong pumping schedules. If you recommend that borehole to be pumped for 12 hours, they are going to pump it for 24 hours. The municipality doesn't even know how many boreholes they have. Because you go to their database, ask them, can I get a list of your boreholes and the coordinates? You know what, you don't have that. You better go there and check it yourself. So every time you need to, consultants are updating, are writing reports and sending it to the municipalities, but municipalities don't have a single database that they can store this information. Pump operators lack necessary skills on groundwater management. One pump operator was told that, you know what, start pumping from 6 o'clock to 12 o'clock, 12 a.m. Is it 12 p.m.? So 12 p.m. But during 12 p.m., the time of switching off, he went to town. He said, no, I'll check it maybe at 5 p.m. when I come back from town. He's not understanding that 5-hour difference, what it's going to do to the groundwater level. So we need to really equip them. And then lack of community engagement. If you get a proposal to go to any village, to go to any town, when you arrive there, the community says, we don't know, what do you want here? Who are you? We don't know, we're not even expecting you. But you call the municipality or the councillors, they tell you that, no, it's fine, you can go there, they know what is happening. So the community hasn't taken ownership, so they are not being involved into the project. So how do we change the situation? Well, we definitely have to employ groundwater specialists in the public sector. Whether we want it or not, we can't even avoid it. We have to do that because that is where the planning is made. Private people are taking care of their groundwater, of their boreholes, but most of the groundwater is used in the public sector for villages and small towns. So we need to develop resources at the right place, where there is enough recharge and where there is enough store capacity. And also need to manage them scientifically, meaning that we need groundwater modelers. We don't have to manage boreholes based on pressure from politicians or pressure from the community. We have to stick to the scientific needs. We have to train pump operators. I know that there's each village or each small town has a pump operator that they choose. So whether they're educated or not, we have to go back, train them, and just teach them that 1 hour you miss of switching off, it does something to the water level. We have to involve communities at all levels. So there has to be a sense of ownership. Because if you go to a farmer knows that I have 3 boreholes in my farm. If I don't take care of those boreholes and I lose them, I'm going to lose my income, I'm going to lose my water, it's going to affect me. But the community doesn't know that. So we have to teach them that these boreholes that you have, if you don't take care of them, you're going to lose them and it's going to affect you. And we have to establish a long-term GIS data management system so that if one geohydrologist went there last week to do hydrosensors and I come after a year, I don't have to do the same thing. I can just go on the data management system to check what is happening. This is a GIS management system that was developed for one of our clients. This client is a big industrial farmer, so he's managing about 1,357 boreholes, just this private farm. So that's a lot. So they came to us also, so we have to really develop the total recharge of the area, the connectivity of the area, just to check what is happening. So what we did, or what is happening, is that you have a gauge here. So this gauge knows exactly what is happening in each and every borehole. They've installed 11 loaders. So if that borehole there's over obstruction, the gauge goes up. You can see it in your office, and then you just go back there and say, switch off that borehole so that the others can operate. But if everything is clean, it says all my holes are operating optimally. And here, if you click that, he's going to see the position of all these boreholes with the colors of the gauge. The case study that we have, there was a groundwater resource implementation program in Limpopo, which Aegis was very much involved in. So the basis of this is that the data must be at one place. And if the data is at one place, let's say, for example, you want to build a bridge. You just go here, you just check, is there any borehole within here before you start drilling a borehole? And then if you see that there's a borehole, then you can just say, let's equip it and use that borehole instead of drilling new boreholes and new boreholes. So it gives you an information of what has happened in the past. And it was a success that even Water Affairs said, you know what, we're going to use this system, but I'm not even sure that if it's maintained anymore. So these are some of the success stories of CREEP, where people were saying that, you know what, because of CREEP, because of we went in there, it was able to save us a lot of money. This is the Seho. The Seho came to Aegis years back and saying that in Kahisano Moloko, I have identified land. What I want to do, I want to start some sort of a gardening service or gardening service for the community, where the community can plow and have their vegetables, and from there they can even sell to nearby shops. So it was a success because we went there, we drilled the borehole, and that's a dry area, it's a desert. You can even see it from the side. It's very, very dry. So we went there, drilled the new borehole within the proximity. So she didn't have to spend a lot of money pulling water from the dams and rivers to this side. And that was a success. And as you can see there, the community is very happy. They're even selling to the nearby shops. In conclusion, we usually, if there is no water, we start blaming groundwater because we don't see it. I don't want to blame the pump operator because we might end up fighting. I don't want to blame the designer of the pipelines because I know the person, but groundwater, it won't fight back. So now we should stop blaming groundwater, because at the end of the day, what we're realizing is that lack of knowledge, lack of specialists, poor infrastructure, and not adhering to operations and maintenance is the problems that we have. So if we can solve that, I think there could be good groundwater management, and we might not have problems in the future. But if you don't change anything and you go the way things are, you are going to have problems and nothing is going to be fixed. Thank you.
I've truly learned a lot. And one of the speakers said, if there's one thing that we must take today, is what he mentioned at that point in time. But as for me today, I think one critical thing that I've learned is that there is a common ground to explain the scientific history of water using Genesis 1, verses 1 to 11. Thank you very much, Prof. Guys, I'm going to be very quick. I actually don't have any presentation. I'm the laboratory manager of the Eco-Analytical Center that is downstairs here. And it is headed by Prof Ingrid Dennis, who is part of the Center for Water Sciences. Our laboratory is equipped with modern facilities, and it is operated by very experienced and trained staff. And we are dealing with various customers that are coming from different backgrounds. We have customers in different areas of South Africa. We have customers in our neighboring countries, like DRC and Namibia. But most importantly, we also have customers from the private sector, and also have customers from the consultants, and some of them that are giving presentations here. Now, the question that we have to answer before I sit it down is why anyone should consider using eco-analytical laboratory. Of course, we are specializing in the analysis of water and soil, and this forum being for soil, I am only going to give you 3 reasons on why anyone should consider testing the quality of the water using our laboratory. And the first reason is, amongst the staff that we have a combined experience of approximately 60 years. You will not get that anywhere. The second reason is we have the state-of-the-art equipment. We are talking about ICP-MS, ion chromatography, water isotope analyzer, HPLC, and other equipment. Now, the last one, which is also very critical, we have the ability to customize our analytical methods as per the need of our individual customers. Now, anyone who's working in the water industry will tell you that most laboratories, they prefer to work with standard methods. Yes, we do have standard methods, but in addition to our standard methods, we have the willingness to customize our methods so that they suit the specific needs of each and every one of our customers. And with those 3 reasons, we are looking forward to welcome you as part of our customers in moving towards the future. Thank you very much.
This brings us to the end of our evening. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for staying for so long. Oh, I should also thank the Groundwater Division, as well as the association with WISA, with the Young Water Professionals, and as well as the NUGS, North-West University Geological Society, for coming together and allowing us to have this event. But more importantly, I'd like to thank Prof Ingrid for allowing us to have this event in this place, in our center as well, for offering the facilities. So, okay, then, good evening, and we'll talk outside. Thank you.